Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 7, Halacha 4, and today we're going to be talking about another case about Zimun, and it's going to finish up the chapter. And the Mishnah says, regarding two groups that were eating in one house, when some members of the group cannot see each other, they may combine with each other for a Zimun. But if not, these join in Zimun by themselves, and these join in Zimun by themselves. So what is this talking about? This is talking about a case where they are allowed, says the Mishnah Beur 195.2, if they decide to act as one group for the purpose of Zimun, but they are not required to. Okay, this is a case where maybe there's a curtain separating two groups of men for some reason. Maybe they're in Corona capsules, and they have some reason why this group here and that group there can't see each other. But they're not required to join, but they can choose to. That's going to be the idea. Now, the question is going to be, says the Haredim, that, as an example, they are, separated by a curtain, or a room is going to be shaped in a way where they're sitting in different corners and they can't see each other. And he says that, if they are served by the same waiter, for example, then even these two groups may combine into one large Zimun. That's going to be the note by the Haredim. Now, the Mishnah is going to continue, and it's going to talk about undiluted wine. And the Mishnah says, we do not recite the Beur Priagafen blessing over wine until water is poured into it to dilute it. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer, but the sages say we do recite the Beur Priagafen blessing over it. By the way, today the wine is diluted with water, so it's already done for you, but in this day it was undiluted. And so in the period of the Talmud, the wine was very, very strong, and it was not normal for anybody to enjoy this beverage without it being cut, and the alcohol was very, very intense. And Rabbi Eliezer is holding that it does not qualify for Beur Priagafen until it's going to be finished. And the idea is, as we were covering earlier, is that wine is going to be a thing of grapes that's been transformed into a better, higher quality product. And until it's finished by having it mixed with a little bit of water, it doesn't count, says Rabbi Eliezer's point, that it was fully transformed yet into this higher quality product. Now, before this, it was not really, people just didn't drink it that way, okay? And the idea is that they're debating whether it's still going to have this blessing yet or not. Now, the Ritva is holding that the sages are holding that even undiluted wine is going to be transformed into this higher quality product that merits this special blessing of Beur Priagafen. And Rabbi Eliezer is holding that it has not yet been finished and therefore not transformed into that. That's really what the argument is. The sages are saying it has been transformed into this better product, and Rabbi Eliezer is saying it hasn't been. Both cases make a lot of sense. Okay, so the Gemara now is going to talk about the first ruling of the Mishnah that talks about two groups that can combine together for Zimun if some of the members can even see each other, Now, the Gemara reads like this. By the way, this text is heavily amended by the Vilna Goan. This is going to be the commonly accepted text but there are variations. And this text reads like this. It says, Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Abba bar Zemina said in the name of Rabbi Zera, this ruling is necessary only when two groups are in two houses. But when they're in one house, it is unnecessary to state that if they can see each other, they may combine in Zimun. Well, that is focusing, the Mishnah is focusing, says Rosh Cirilio, on a case where one house can teach us this novelty regarding the later half of the statement that two groups cannot see each other and they may not combine for Zimun, even if they're in one house. And the idea, says Rosh Cirilio, is that whether the two groups are in one house or two houses, if they can't see each other, they may combine for Zimun, and if they cannot see each other, they may not combine. So that seems to be what they're arguing about, trying to interpret what this is saying and versus what the Mishnah is saying. And the Gemara is going to explain it further. And Rabbi Yochanan says, but this is true only if they entered from the first moment with the understanding that they were going to combine together. Otherwise, these two groups may not join to form one large Zimun, even though they can see each other. So the Mara Fulda explains like this. He says that it's unclear whether Rabbi Yochanan refers to the case where the groups are in two houses or even to a case where they are in one house. And some commentators explain, says the Mara Fulda, that he refers specifically to a case of two houses, where others explain that the two groups can see each other and they're in one house, and they may decide at any point to combine to form one large Zimun. And the Rashba, in his parallel commentary in the Bavli 50b, is explaining that Rabbi Yochanan means that even if the two groups are in one house, they ate as separate groups, and they may not combine for Zimun unless they intended for this at the very first moment. But the Or Chaim in 195.1 is going to be able to answer that and is going to be able to give you the halacha l'maisa on this. And the Haredim has deep insight about this, and his approach is a little bit novel. And the Haredim explains that the reason this is because there's a bond between the groups that lacks permanence, and at any point in the meal, the absent waiter, who, by the way, it would be common that perhaps there was a single waiter, or there were two waiters, and then there's a waiter coming to do this in two houses or in the two different areas, and that there could be a waiter who shows up and he's going to start serving the group, and then the two groups are no longer sharing a common waiter. And so we know that the waiter matters, like in the Korban Pesach. And over here, this could be a case where perhaps the waiter didn't show up, and that you have a connection between the groups because of a common waiter. That's going to be the novel insight of the Haredim on this. Very, very interesting idea. The Gemara is going to ask a question, and it's going to say, those people who dine at the house of the Nasi, where many guests are seated in different dining halls within the same complex, how do you treat them? Are these guests considered like people eating in one house who can all see each other so they may join in one large Zimun? Or are they considered like people eating in two houses who cannot see each other so that each hall must form its own Zimun? In other words, in the Nasi's house, you had many, many dining halls, and in fact, perhaps you couldn't even see the other people in the dining hall. However, it's taking place in the same house. Well, how are you going to treat that? That's going to be what the question is. Are they going to be able to form together, even if they can't see each other, but they're in the same house, or not? And the Gemara is going to answer this, and it's going to say, we say as follows. If it is the practice of the people dining in one hall to pass over to the people dining in the other hall, they may join in Zimun, and if it is not their practice, they may not join in Zimun. The idea here, says the Pnei Moshe, is that if the guests are mingling together, they are considered to be partaking of a joint meal. Otherwise, if they are not, then each dining hall would be separate. That's a deep insight. In other words, if people are going back and forth between the halls to go talk to each other, then it's really treated like a single group. So they could, if they wanted to, join together for a Zimun, even though they're in different dining halls, and perhaps they can't even see each other. But the people are connecting each other back and forth. I think this is perhaps also the Haredim's point, is that if you had two different dining halls and you had a common waiter, and the waiter is connecting these two people, perhaps there's a connection as well. The Gemara now is going to talk about the practice of a sage, and Rabbi Berechot would station his spokesperson, his spokesman, at the doorway in the middle of the study hall, and he would lead the Zimun for both these on this side of the doorway and those on that side. In other words, that in the Talmudic era, you had a sage holding a discussion to communicate his thoughts, and then the spokesman would hear it, and then he would announce it in a very, very loud voice so everybody could hear the sage's words in public. That way, the sage didn't need to sit there and waste his energy shouting. So perhaps he would even say it kind of quietly, and then the spokesman would declare it. And basically what he's saying is that there would be one group over here on this side of the doorway and another group over there, and basically they couldn't see each other, but they would combine for one large Zimun, since all of them could see the spokesman who was stationed in the doorway in the middle, and he was also going to be announcing to each of the groups, and this made a connection. So this also seems to support the idea that the Haredim's talking about with a common waiter. Now, the Mishnah is going to say that we do not recite the Beur Priagafen blessing over wine until water is poured into it to dilute it. Now, those are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara says that the sages say we do recite the Beur Priagafen blessing over it. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about an instance where everyone agrees that undiluted wine is not treated like wine. No malochet here. So here's the story. Gemara says Rabbi Zarika said in the name of Rabbi Yosef ben Hanina, the sages concede to Rabbi Eliezer regarding the cup of blessing. In other words, that's going to be the cup of wine where you have Berechot Mazon, and where they're saying that one must pour a little bit of water into it to dilute it. Otherwise, it may not be used as a cup of blessing. Now, the idea here, says the Haredim, is that since undiluted wine is not a choice beverage, one is not permitted to use it for a cup of blessing. And the idea is, says Haredim, that the requirement that a mitzvah be performed in the best way possible, and therefore, in a case like in the Talmudic era where the wine is very strong and you can't properly enjoy it without it being diluted, that the way Rabbi Eliezer is saying is that that's not the choicest matter, and the sages agreed to that. No malochet. So the Gemara continues and says, and the latter-day rabbis conducted themselves in this manner also regarding the cup of Kiddush, that they would not recite the Kiddush even over undiluted wine. The idea is that, says the Or Chaim 272.5, that the sages did not specifically require that one use only diluted wine for Kiddush, and that in fact it's permitted to use undiluted wine, but says the Vilna Goan on this, that the rabbis, the latter-day rabbis, nevertheless would not recite Kiddush over such wine because it is preferable to use the diluted wine for Kiddush. Again, you're trying to do the mitzvah in the best, choicest way possible. Now, the Gemara is going to challenge the last part of the statement on the practice of these rabbis who came a little bit later. And the Gemara reads like this. It says, the statement of Rabbi Yosef ben Hanina apparently is contradictory to the practice of Rabbi Yonah. For Rabbi Yonah would taste wine from the Kiddush cup on Friday night, and fix the remaining wine in the cup on the Shabbos day for use in the time of the Kiddush. And basically, what kind of wine did Rabbi Yonah use for the Friday night Kiddush? And the Gemara says that if you say that the wine was diluted, how could he have used the same wine again for the Kiddush day, the Shabbos day Kiddush? And it was taught in a Brisa that if one drinks a beverage that has stayed overnight in a diluted state, his blood is upon his own head. The idea is that it's very dangerous to drink a diluted beverage. And in fact, we know this is true, that the alcohol did kill a lot of germs. So perhaps you're diluting it enough where the alcohol content's low enough and it can get germy overnight. That's going to be consistent with what the Gemara says and also with real germ theory. And the question is that, well, it seems that the wine must not have been diluted because of this problem. So we can see that Rabbi Yonah is using a cup of undiluted wine for Friday night Kiddush, and that would contradict Rabbi Yosef's report that the rabbis would not recite Kiddush over undiluted wine. Now, the Gemara is going to reconcile this report of Rabbi Yosef with the practice of Rabbi Yonah, and it's going to clarify this brisa. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan said this teaching of the brisa applies only if the diluted beverage passed the night in a metallic vessel, and if the beverage passed overnight in an earthen or wooden one, there's no danger in drinking from it the next day. So it's possible that Rabbi Yonah said the Kiddush on Friday over the diluted wine in keeping with Rabbi Yosef's report, and that he kept the wine overnight in an earthen or wooden vessel. And we do know that if you're keeping wine in a metal vessel, it does change it. It does change it chemically. So that's a real thing. And you see here that the sages are really on the ball, and everything the sages say is true. We just have to work hard to understand what they say. Now, regarding this mention over the wine that's used in Berechot Mazon, where it must be diluted, the Gemara is now going to discuss another law on this cup. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the earlier ones inquired, what is the law regarding whether the left hand may support the right hand in holding the cup of blessing? Now, this is going to be a case where if one uses the right hand and the right hand gets tired from holding the cup, he may use the left hand to hold it. That's going to be the question. And this might occur if you have a very large or heavy cup. And it could also happen where Berechot Mazon is very long and where maybe the cup, is very heavy and maybe the person's a little bit older. Also, when Rosh Chodesh Teves falls on a Shabbos, the Berechot Mazon includes the extra blessings for Hanukkah and the Rosh Chodesh and also the Shabbos. And the idea is that the cup always is going to be held on the right hand. The Gemara is going to be really asking, can you use the left hand to support it? Are you allowed to do it? Always a lot of symbolism. You talk about the right hand being the hand of mercy and the left hand being the hand of judgment. So you're sitting here doing Kiddush or Berechot Mazon, and you want to be using your right hand because it's alluding to mercy. Also, this connects back to when they were picking lots on Yom Kippur. Anyway, the Gemara, without resolving the inquiry, analyzes this. And the Gemara says that you can infer three laws from this question. First, you can infer that one must hold the cup of blessing in the right hand while saying Berechot Mazon. And the second that you can learn from this is that the hand must be raised at least a tefach above the table. And the third that you can infer is that he must set his eyes and look at the cup while saying Berechot Mazon. So the Gemara is going to continue with laws pertaining to the cup of blessing. And Rabbi Acha says three things were said regarding the cup of blessing. The first is that it has to be full. The second is it requires crowning. In other words, that the cup should be surrounded with other cups filled with wine. This I always found to be a very interesting nusach or tradition that was held here in Eretz Yisrael. And the other one is that it must be washed before filling with wine. Now, we always do that. The Mara Fulda points out that the inside of the cup should be washed so that there's nothing left over from a previous drinking. And the Bavli also says that there's a requirement to wash the outside of the cup as well. So when you get into Tamei and Tahor issues, there'll be issues with that. But anyway, one washes a cup. And the other thing is that the cup is supposed to be full. You're not supposed to have a deficient cup. You're not supposed to have a defective cup. So there's a Sephardi tradition that you pour a little bit more so it overflows. Why is it overflowing? Because you're fulfilling this. The point is that it's definitely filled. It's definitely full. It's definitely filled. And that's why it overflows, so you know that it is full. And so we know the source from that tradition. It's right here. This is where the source is for that tradition, that custom. And the Gemara is going to explain what all this means. And it says that all three of these laws are alluded to in one verse, as it says. Naphtali is satiated with favor and filled with Hashem's blessing. Now, this you can find in Devarim 33:23, and the idea is that the Gemara, says Rabbi Kanievsky in his Beur shiurim, interprets the phrase filled with Hashem's blessing as alluding to the cup of blessing, and that is what we are covering with the halacha. Now, satiated refers to the law that the cup must be crowned, says the Gemara, and when crowned, it is satiated with the wine of the surrounding cups. So that is going to be interesting. Now, favor refers to the law that it must be washed, for only when washed does the cup find favor in the eyes of the people. So the Haredim points out that people of a delicate nature do not drink from an unwashed cup. Also, if you notice your cup the next morning after Kiddush, it'll have purple stains from the wine in it. So you wash it out because you always want to beautify a mitzvah. And then the idea says filled, as the plain meaning indicates. It refers that the cup must be full. Now, what is the reward if you're going to keep these laws that Rabbi Acha is pointing out? And Rabbi Hanina says in this Gemara, if you have done so, you will be rewarded with what is written further in that verse, which is that you shall inherit the sea and the south. And that means that you will merit to inherit, says this Gemara, both this world and the world to come. Now, there's a lot going on here, and I want to look at the Haredim's notes about this because there's a lot of agadic things in this. So he says that the letters, the Yud and the He, in the word Yerusha, which are extra, he says, it ends, Yerusha starts with a Yud and it ends with a He, Yerusha, that this extra Yud and He is extra in this word. And the same meaning is that you shall inherit, and that could have been conveyed by the shorter word of resh. Now, the Yud is you will. That's it will be. You will inherit, right? It's that Yud is like also where we're having from Rabbi Akiva's extra Yud in Yitameh in the Mishnah, which is it will be contaminated, right? This is also this Yud that it will be, right? So the addition of this extra letter is an allusion to both this world and the next world. Now, in Masechet Hagiga in chapter 2, it goes on with an explanation of the Yud and the He as being in the shapes and in being how it's going to work in this world and the next, and how it's an allusion to things in this world, things in the next world, how you are behaving in this world and it'll affect things in the next world, how you're supposed to behave in this world. And the Yud and the Hey have a lot of symbolism. Now, the extra part of these two particular letters are an allusion to both this world and the next. Now, the Gemara over there in chapter 2, Halacha 1 in Yerushalmi Chagiga is explaining over there that the letter Hey is talking about the world to come, and the shape of it has a lot of symbolism with it, and that then you have this you have the world to come, and it was created with the letter Yud, and the extra letters here in the Torah are showing a lot of symbolism to it. Now, the Maharal also has a lot of commentary about this particular sugya, and we actually have a note by the Maharal, and he's saying that blessing Hashem with a cup that is full, crowned, and washed elevates the level of the blessing offered to him, and Hashem in return reciprocates to that person with his blessing, which encompasses both this world and the world to come, as his blessing has no limit. That's the note by the Maharal about this. Now, there's a lot of other explanations about this. This is a very deep thing that's filled with a lot of meaning. For instance, the Rif has a commentary about this that says that the sea is an allusion to the world to come, which you can see in Yov, where it says wider than the sea, and the south is an allusion to this world, where he's describing from Yeshua 15:19, where it says the land of the south, and the land of the south is dry and arid, and the world is dry and arid and barren in this world compared to the world to come. That's the note by the Rif. So there's a lot going on here. It's a very famous sugya in the Yerushalmi, and there's a lot of commentary on it, and a lot of our customs come from this. So there's going to be another ruling that's going to get cited. Rabbi Elazar said one may not recite a blessing like Kiddush or Havdalah or Berechot Hamazon over a defective cup. What's a defective cup? Well, that's going to be one where it's either not filled to the top or it's going to be less than a rivus. Now, the Haredim is also going to add that a defective cup could also be one that is broken. So if a defective cup is something that could be broken, then one should be concerned with washing the cup because you want to beautify it. Now, it doesn't make it defective, right? But you could see that we want to stay away from a defective cup, so that if you have a cup that ends up being stained, it's not as nice, and so that you can see that there's such a rush to come and get a very good cup and one that's not defective, that you want to do what you can to make sure that it is clean. Because, again, as the Haredim is pointing out, that a defective cup could even refer to a cup that's broken. So there's a lot going on over here. Now, even if the cup is full and it contains a rivus, that could be a category of defective cup, and the idea is that perhaps there could be a problem with the wine, and that could also be considered like a defective cup. So there's a related ruling, and let me read it again. Rabbi Elazar said one may not recite a blessing like Kiddush, Havdalah, Berechot Hamazon over a defective cup, and if one tasted a cup of wine, he rendered it defective. So the idea is that perhaps even if the cup is full and there's a rivus, but there's a problem with the wine, perhaps even that could be a defective cup. And if perhaps the wine has soured or something like that, you can get wine that turns sour, and then you have a problem. So perhaps it could even be a problem with the wine. And certainly, if the person is tasting the cup of wine and he didn't do the blessing, then there's a lot of other problems with that, because you have to do the proper blessing. So we don't do it over a defective cup. What would be a defective cup? Well, a defective cup would be one where you're not doing the kiddush in the right way, and perhaps you didn't say the bracha correctly. That would also be a defective cup. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about this ruling, and the Gemara says that you can derive 3 specific laws from this statement. Again, this statement is talking about the defective cup from Rabbi Elazar. And first, you can derive from it that one may not recite a blessing over what is literally a defective cup. In other words, one that is not filled to the top. So defective here would be one where it's going to be lacking either a revis of wine or it's not filled to the cup. And, this teaching is showing that one may not use any defective cup. And there are special blessings that you have to do, and that, you have to have a cup that, is not lacking in wine. If it's lacking, even if it doesn't even reach a rivis, it's invalidated. And the Beur Priagafen must be recited for a defective cup, even if it's not for a regular cup. In other words, if you have a cup where there's a problem on it, and what do you do? Well, you still have to say Beur Priagafen, even if there's a problem with the actual cup itself. Perhaps it's broken, and even if you're doing it over a perfectly good cup of wine, you still have to say Beur Priagafen. But perhaps there's a problem with the cup, even if the cup was quote unquote defective and less than the edge of it. In other words, you didn't pour it out to be full and it had more than a rivis in it. Well, you still have to say Beur Priagafen, but again, we are talking about doing the blessing for Kiddush, Havdalah, or Berechot Mazon, and you're not supposed to be doing it on a quote unquote defective cup, one that is not filled to the top. Now, let's say again you have one where you've done it 3/4 of the way in your cup. There's more than a rivis, but it's less than halfway full. Do you say Beur Priagafen? Yes, you do. You do, right? But it's a defective cup, and you have a problem with that for doing Kiddush, right? Kiddush is supposed to be on a full cup. So just because you have a problem with the cup does not mean that you don't say Beur Priagafen. That's really the point I want to get out there, because you might think that, well, if there's a defective cup, then perhaps you're not saying the bracha. And that's not true. You are saying the bracha. It doesn't exclude it, but it means that there's a problem with trying to do your Kiddush. So one of the laws that we learn here is it's got to be filled up to the top. And the second law that you can derive, says the Gemara, is that the cup must have a minimum amount of wine. That's going to be a rivis. And if it's lacking even this amount, in other words, it's less than a rivis, it's going to be considered defective, even if it's filled to the top. So perhaps you have a little tiny shot glass, it's less than a rivis, and you fill this little tiny shot glass up to the top. Well, it satisfies all those things, but it's less than a rivis, so it's a defective cup. And the third thing that we can derive from it, says the Gemara, is that if one tasted a cup of wine, he also rendered it defective and unfit for use. So what could that be? And actually, says the Haredim, says the Sidei Yeshua, that we do not need to derive this from Rabbi Elazar's words, because he says it explicitly. What the Gemara means is follows. It says the Sidei Yeshua, when Rabbi Elazar says, and if one tasted a cup of wine, he renders it defective, he does not mean that this is the only way to render a cup defective, but rather that this also renders a cup defective. And if tasting wine were the only way to render a cup defective, Rabbi Elazar would have omitted the first part of the statement altogether and stated it in the second part. And one may not recite a blessing over a defective cup. This idea here does not refer to a cup from which one tasted, but to a cup that is defective in its fullness or measure. And since we derive from the latter part of Rabbi Elazar's statement that tasting wine renders a cup defective, we are able to derive the former part, that it has to have fullness and it has to have a measure of a measure of a rivus. And the Rabbi Kanievsky points out in his Beur shiurim that the possibility of fixing the defect caused by a tasting, and if the cup cannot be fixed, it can still be used if there's no other wine available. So the idea is that perhaps somebody tasted this wine before they did the kiddush. Perhaps it's after the meal, so they're still covered on the original Borei Priagafen, but perhaps the person absent-mindedly picked up the kiddush wine and tasted a little bit of it. Maybe he was checking to make sure it's not vinegar or something, or he just wanted to taste it. And so now he brought it underneath that level of a defective, of that, fullness. And so effectively he rendered it defective. And the idea is that you're not now supposed to make kiddush on that cup. You're supposed to refill it and fill it back to the top, and then do it properly. So it's not as nice to come and take the kiddush cup now, or the cup that you're going to use for after Berechot Hamazon, and then you taste a little bit of it, you bring it down under that fullness level, and now you're going to go do the bracha on it. It's not as nice. It's not choice. So now we were talking about the cup used for kiddush, and it has to have no less than a rivus of wine. And the Gemara now is going to talk about the order of the procedure for one who does not have enough wine to meet all of his needs on the Shabbos. So Rabbi Tanchum Bar Yudan says, the honor of the Shabbos day takes precedence over the honor of the Shabbos Eve, but Kiddush on the Shabbos Eve takes precedence over Kiddush on the Sabbath day. Now the Gemara is going to explain what is the honor of the Shabbos day. And Rabbi Yosef says in the name of Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, and Rabbi Elazar Bar Yosef says in the name of Rav, wine whose sole importance is the Borei Priagafen blessing recited over. Wine that is not used for this mitzvah of Kiddush, but only to honor the Shabbos. That's the idea. Now, it says the Pnei Moshe, the Gemara is explaining the meaning of the phrase honor of the Shabbos day. And it's saying that it's referring to wine that one drinks in addition to the Kiddush wine as a means for honoring the Sabbath day. And the reference to Borei Priagafen is a little bit perplexing. It says the Sedei Yeshua, because one generally does not recite a blessing when drinking wine during the Shabbos meal, since one already recited the blessing on the Kiddush wine. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to go over to another subject. And Rabbi Zerikon, the son of the father-in-law of the well-known Zerikon, is what the Gemara says, mentioned the supplemental passage of the Hanukkah blessing in the blessing of the land. That's going to be in the second blessing of Berechot Hamazon. This, by the way, is the part where they add in Al HaNisim. Now, normally, Al HaNisim would go in the third blessing, where in Berechot Hamazon, where the Reitzeh, which is what you say on Shabbos, we were covering that yesterday, and Yale Ve'avo, that's on Yom Tov, where that's going to be inserted. But what's happening here is he inserted that into the second blessing, as, by the way, we do it today. And he did so because Al-Hanas Nisim is an expression of thanksgiving to Hashem for miracles. Haredim says that he performed for us. It's an expression of miracles that God performed for us, and therefore it belongs in the second blessing of Berechot Hamazon, where we thank Hashem for the various gifts He bestowed upon us, says the Haredim. So the Gemara here says that it was put into the second blessing. He said it in the second blessing, and the sages praised him for that. And there's a similar incident. And Rabbi Ba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Ba, when saying Berechot Hamazon in a mourner's house, mentioned the true judge in the blessing of Hatov veHamativ, in the fourth blessing of Berechot Hamazon. And the sages praised him for that. Now, what is that? That's going to be in a mourner's house, and that's going to be, says the Or Chaim 189.2, that's going to be the text that's in the fourth blessing of Berechot Hamazon, the true judge, and the discussion of why the practice is, this practice is generally not followed nowadays, but nonetheless it's talked about in the Or Chaim 189.2, and there's a brisa in the Bavli in 46b where the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Akiva actually disagree with the text, and the Tanna Kama hold that a reference of the true judge is incorporated into the standard Hatov veHamativ blessing, and Rabbi Akiva holds that this special true judge blessing actually replaces the Hatov veHamativ blessing. So in this way, Rabbi Ba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Ba, is conducting himself in the view of the Tanna Kama. That's going to be the idea. Now, there's a lot going on with the Hatov veHamativ blessing, and the Haredim points out that inserting it over here gives a hint to the mourner that even in a time of tragedy, one can recognize that Hashem is good and confers good, and just as the Jewish nation came to this recognition after the Beitar tragedy, ultimately all of Hashem's judgment is based on kindness and truth, and they all reflect His unlimited goodness, says the Haredim. The Gemara is going to close off the chapter with a few rulings, and the Gemara is actually going to refer to something that is a very deep tradition that that actually the Vilna Goan used to follow. The Vilna Goan, when he would say the blessings after the food, after Berechot Hamazon, would wrap himself in a special cloak. And the source for why he did that is actually coming up right now in this sugya. And the Gemara goes like this. Rabbi Ba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, said, if one ate while walking, he must stand still to recite Berechot Hamazon. And the idea is that one is going to concentrate better when standing in place than when walking. Also, we covered this in an earlier part in chapter 7, that we had a case where many people were walking together on a road, and are they going to be bound together as they're walking and eating to say Berechot Hamazon? And the answer is no, they were not. So there's something special about walking versus sitting while you are eating. And over here, he's saying if you ate while walking, perhaps he's eating a sandwich or something like that, you still have to say Berechot Hamazon. Again, you're doing that, but are those people in that earlier halacha in chapter 7, are they going to be bound to Zimun, even if the 10 people were eating together and walking together and each one has to say Berechot Hamazon, but are they going to do Zimun? They're not, but they still have to do Berechot Hamazon because they ate bread. So the rule here is that he must stand still to recite the Berechot Hamazon. And the Gemara continues and says, if one ate while standing still, he must sit down to recite Berechot Hamazon. And if one ate while reclining, he must sit upright to recite Berechot Hamazon. The idea is that one is going to concentrate better when sitting upright than reclining. That's going to be the idea here, as explained by the Haredim. Also, the Haredim points out that saying Berechot Hamazon while reclining is an act of conceit. It doesn't look humble, says the Haredim, and it's not consistent with trying to have the proper awe of Hashem, says the Haredim. And the Gemara continues, and it says, if one was sitting upright, he must wrap himself in a cloak to recite Berechot Hamazon. So this is where the tradition from the Vilna Goan is going to come from. And the Gemara says that if one does this and he wraps himself in a cloak for Berechot Hamazon, he is similar to the ministering angels. And what is the scriptural basis for this assertion? It is the verse, with 2 wings each seraph would cover his face, and with 2 wings he would cover his feet. And that's from Yeshayahu 6:2. But the idea is that it will enable him to avoid any distractions, and he can have an even higher level of concentration, and it's a way of giving extra honor to Hashem. That's the idea. And this, by the way, in Yeshayahu 6:2, the following verse says, and one would call to another, saying, Holy, holy, holy is Hashem, master of legions. And the angels would cover themselves out of respect for Hashem when uttering this praise. And basically the idea is that the person who's wrapping himself up in this cloak when blessing Hashem is acting just like these angels when they're blessing Hashem as well. Very deep idea. And actually Rabbi Kanievsky is saying that one who ate while sitting is obligated to do this. And it's also praiseworthy. So that's a very, very beautiful and deep idea. The principle behind all these rulings is that regardless of the position in which a person finds himself, he is required to make some sort of change to improve the quality of his Berechot Hamazon. And that's going to be the idea in this Yerushalmi. Now, there's a lot of differences in the Bavli parallel 51b, but the idea here in the Yerushalmi is that you're changing your position in order to do this. So a lot of depth here.